My name is Kay Seaver. I have 35 years of mining experience, and I'm going to share with you in the next 45 minutes or so, 50 minutes, some concepts that you have never heard before about the financial side of the business and the possibility that mines all over the world are missing millions of dollars of additional profit and don't know it. And so the title of my presentation today is Mining Hidden Losses, Increasing Your Competitive Advantage Without Investing in New Equipment. For those of you that work in the industry, or perhaps you're studying to work in the industry someday, you've already recognized and know that we depend on our equipment for pretty much all of our profit. And unfortunately, we either haven't been able to estimate up to this point the contribution that our people make, or we've overlooked that particular part of our profit generation. And so I'm going to be sharing some ways with you today that we can actually make those linkages, perhaps for the very first time. I like to start presentations sometimes with a simple definition of a term that we might have used for years. So if we're going to talk about competitive advantage today, I thought it might be good to start with a definition. And so this is one definition that's commonly used: a condition or circumstance that puts a firm, a company in other words, in a favorable or superior position over its competitors, allowing it to generate greater sales or margins than those competitors. And so our focus on hidden losses will give us the opportunity to do that, and I'm going to show you how that works. An important question for us to ask at this point is, what if mines and plants could report millions of additional dollars in profit and not spend any money to get it? And further, what if we could boost our profit margins when prices are low, like the kinds of prices we're experiencing today, with the people and equipment we already have in place? Can we imagine the competitive advantage that we would have over other companies? And the good news is that we already have the capability of generating additional profit at no cost, but there is something hiding it from us. So we're going to experience and talk about what it is that's hiding this additional profit from us, and begin understanding what we can do to take away that barrier. When I talk about hidden losses, I like to use a jar for an analogy. When we go to the store, we buy things in jars. We are focused on what's inside the jar and perhaps the size of the jar, depending on how much of that product we need. We very rarely give any thought to the lid on the jar. And the lid on a jar does two things for us. It keeps whatever's inside the jar in there, and it prevents anything on the outside from getting in. That's its function. Have you ever considered that organizations, mines, plants, supplier companies have invisible lids? Lids that we've never been able to see, that prevent old ideas from getting out and new ideas from getting in. So let's explore this lid, what it is, what it's made up of. There are three components to this lid. One are traditional management perspectives that we've had for decades about business, about what it is that's management's function. We're going to explore a little bit about that. The decision criteria that we use also becomes a lid to achieving even more. And lastly, the contribution that working relationships, especially between departments, makes to the bottom line. Weaknesses in all three of these areas create hidden losses. And so we're going to explore a little bit about each of these areas in today's session. When we say hidden losses, perdidas occultas, what are they? What are the cause? Why are they hidden losses? Why can't we see them? We're going to look at some examples so that we can understand the magnitude of the dollars we're speaking about here, what they impact in our organization, and steps we might take to convert them to profit. It's important as we consider this topic that there's really three things that the focus on hidden losses change. It changes what we fix, problems that we solve, in other words. It changes what we measure, how we measure our success, and it changes what we talk about when we're together in meetings, in problem-solving sessions, when we're working on change initiatives, whatever it is that we're starting up a new operation, whatever it is, it changes what we talk about. So let's look at earnings capacity and hidden losses, and to understand the relationship between those two a little bit closer. This pair of binoculars is on the screen for a reason. In the next few slides, we're going to focus on hidden losses and the numbers that we use in the business to make decisions with. When we use a pair of binoculars, we are looking to restrict our field of view, but enhance what we can see in that field of view. So we put them up to our eyes. We can certainly see through the lenses, but that's all we can see. So when we use these binoculars, we're looking out into the distance, but our vision is restricted by what we can see through this lens. And the management system, because of its traditional design, restricts our view of the dollars of potential profit that we can generate in our companies. So what we're going to do today is learn a little bit more about how we can widen that view, how we can take the blinders off our organizations. Let's start with a very basic picture of the management system and basically what it's designed to do. The management system captures statistics, dollars, numbers related to what we actually did in our companies, what we were able to accomplish. Dollars we collected for revenue, dollars we spent to pay our people or operate our processes. It also contains dollars for our plans, budgets, forecasts, 5-year plans, 10-year plans. We use those plans, we compare it to what we actually achieved, and that's how we determine our level of performance. Did we meet our plan, or did we fall short? Or did perhaps we exceeded our plan, which is great. Now, it's important to understand what the management system doesn't contain and doesn't focus on. Potential earnings are greater than actual earnings. And most of the time, they're also greater than what we have put in our budget or 5-year plan. The management system, as it was designed decades ago, with traditional components in it that every company uses all around the world, is missing some key components that are required if we are serious about maximizing profit. It's missing what is needed for us to connect with hidden losses and connect our people to hidden losses so we can actually convert some of those losses to additional profit. When we talk about financial earnings capacity, it's important to focus on these two rectangles for a minute. The rectangle with the R in it represents revenue that a company is capable of achieving. The rectangle with the C in it represents the costs that a company is capable of achieving. Now, this next slide is an important one because it illustrates the disconnect. This red rectangle is the general ledger footprint. And here is one of the sources of the problems in the management system. Notice that the rectangle with the R, the revenue rectangle, actually exceeds the red rectangle. It goes outside the box. Notice that the rectangle with the C in it actually is extended beyond that rectangle with the C in it inside the ledger. Now, let's talk about what this means for a minute, because the fact that these rectangles are not a perfect match is one of the root causes of millions of dollars being lost to management teams every single year. The general ledger is the net result of what happens in a business. By that, I mean that it is the dollars of revenue collected after problems occurred, after certain choices were made within the management team, after other things happen related to the culture of the company and organizational weaknesses. It is the revenue that we actually collect after all these things happen. On the cost side, the cost rectangle in the red box is actually extended beyond what companies are capable of achieving for the same reason. So what this means is that we have hidden losses that are represented by these two boxes with the X's. One relates to the revenue that never hits the ledger and is never reported as a loss. The other relates to costs that are sitting on the ledger, but because they're related to the culture and the organization, become hidden, invisible, because the general ledger and the management system were never designed to separate out the costs related to our organization and how our people work together. Even our accounting staff could not go ahead and carve those costs out for us, but the management team can. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. Now, we're still on the numbers portion of this presentation, so let's talk about hidden losses and what else they affect in our companies. How we measure success is critical to what we actually achieve, believe it or not. And certainly, the hidden losses that make up the lid affect what we measure, our KPIs, affect what we set for targets in our budget. They affect what we set for targets for our incentive plan for our people. They also affect what we believe about our processes and if or when we even need an expansion. And sometimes, because we're disconnected with our hidden losses, millions and millions and millions of dollars are approved for expansions that are unneeded. There are other times where we believe a bottleneck exists in a certain place in the value stream when in fact it's really at a different place. But because we aren't in touch with our hidden losses, we're unaware of that. And we may spend millions of dollars to expand the capacity of a plant or another step in the process when in fact it's really another place in the process that needed that capital. And we expand the wrong place and maybe spend 50 million, maybe more, in an area that really didn't need that excess capital because our hidden losses were hidden from us, and had we been able to tap into those, we could have converted those to profit, raised the level of the bottleneck naturally through a focus through hidden losses without a needed expansion. I'd like to go back to cost reduction strategies for a minute. We talked about the cost side of hidden losses, but hidden losses and the fact that we're unaware of them also result in cost reduction strategies that are sometimes ineffective. And I'll tell you how that works. We're going to go back to this diagram where we show the X's going through our hidden loss boxes. Now you'll notice that I added one line, the dashed line in blue, to this diagram. Management often, when costs are high or prices are low, like they are now, may go to their people and say, we'd like to cut costs by 10% across the board, or we'd like to cut costs by 20% across the board. We expect every department to look at every cost area and try to do that. There's nothing wrong with that cost goal except for one thing. There's an expectation that all costs will be touched by that strategy. What I want to tell you today is that the costs that are linked to the culture, the organizational ineffectiveness, or the weaknesses in the organization will not be touched by that strategy because they are driven by something different. And so the only way to reduce the costs in that box is to go right to the drivers of those costs and address the root causes of those drivers. And once we do that, the dollars vaporize. And as long as we're focused on making sure that whatever it was, that root cause that was driving that higher cost doesn't come back into the organization, we have permanently eliminated those costs from our cost base. I actually have a name, I call this surgical cost reduction, this approach. Because instead of taking this across the board approach, we go in and we carve out piece by piece the costs that are really the culprits, the ones we can't see, and we eliminate them. And by doing that one by one as we do it, profit goes up. Now, let's talk a little bit more about cost reduction strategies and what really happens in the organization. Let's say management decides to cut costs across the board, and one of the things they do is go to procurement. And they say to the procurement group, we want you to find lowest cost vendor. We want you to look for lower cost supplies and lower cost contractors to do work on our site. And when they do that, they expect to get higher profits. Again, the focus is mostly on planned spending. But this is what can happen and often does happen when procurement is asked to do this. Because there is a downstream impact of putting lower cost parts, supplies, and contractors into the value stream. And unfortunately, that impact is often not measured, and it can be in the millions of dollars. And we're going to go through an example of how that works. This same issue touches projects as well, engineering projects. So we've got lowest cost parts and supplies. They go down into the value stream. And in this particular example, this could be a copper mine where we have drill and blast, load and haul, crush, convey, our major functional areas, grinding and flotation, smelting and refining. So we've got cheapest parts. Maybe they go into the crusher area, maybe they go into the mills or in flotation, maybe if it's consumables, and all of a sudden we've got things happening that didn't happen before. We have breakdowns, we have perhaps equipment damage. Maybe we have faster wear of parts, perhaps even lower recovery. Here are 6 examples, and these are all real examples that I've encountered as I've been doing this work. We could have made a list a lot longer than this, but here are 6 problems. You can see that for 6 problems where we were not tracking hidden losses, the total came to almost $50 million. It is my experience that frequently hidden losses exceed 50 million when we start actually discovering them and quantifying them, perhaps even 100 million in large operations. This skill of identifying hidden losses and attaching them to problems is one that will serve you well in your entire careers, because you begin applying this kind of thinking to many problems, many opportunities, and it changes the decision you make, because all of a sudden you understand much more about the dollars at risk than you did before. Let's talk about engineering projects a little bit more in depth here with this same line of thinking with cost reduction goals and how they affect these projects. We've got the same kind of thing happening when procurement is asked to procure perhaps cheaper contractors, cheaper parts, cheaper supplies for projects. And I've only made an example here, a list of 3 things: a new building or plant, a new slurry pipes, perhaps to tailings, or a new conveyor system. We could make a lot longer list than that. Engineers are very specific often when they build the AFE's authorization for expenditures for these projects. Perhaps they've even identified 1 or 2 contractors that are the very best that, because of their expertise, need to be considered for this work. But because procurement has been told to do something different, sometimes those engineering specifications are ignored. And when that happens, now all of a sudden we may have material failures. We may have breaks in major pipes. And the cost of relaying those pipes is just millions of dollars. Perhaps we're building a new building. Perhaps we've got a contractor that really didn't know how to complete the entire job as we needed. And now we need to bring in somebody else at a higher cost. So what happens is, at this point, the project team usually is left explaining what happened on the project. They're left explaining why they missed their ROI target. Perhaps their credibility suffers when, in fact, they wrote everything up as was needed, and because of this lowest cost goal somewhere else in the organization, they were not able to achieve their targets. This is one example that's a real example. I know we could make a longer list, but in this example, we had a conveyor design specification that was ignored. Again, a different vendor was selected, and when that happened, we had hundreds of thousands of dollars that were lost, and we were behind at least 6 weeks in the project and lost production as well. Now, up to this point, we've talked about numbers, dollars, that are impacted in many, many places in our management system. We talked about the general ledger, we talked about the budget, we've talked about KPIs, expansions, projects, many different sets of numbers that are impacted from behind the scenes by hidden losses. Let's switch now to people, our corporate culture, how we work together. A few years ago, I spoke at Mine Expo. Some of you may have been at Mine Expo, or if you haven't, it's a wonderful conference here in Las Vegas every 4 years, one of the largest mining conventions in the world. When I spoke there last, I talked about culture, mining culture. I've defined culture simply as the way people interact with equipment and each other. If we were to take one step back from that definition, an even better definition would be what people are thinking when they interact with equipment and each other. We're going to explore what people think as they come to work, do their work, work with each other, and how that actually is directly tied to hidden losses, and how if we change some of those perspectives, we can make more money. So far, Our sources, our root causes of hidden losses come from two places. They come from management's lack of awareness of hidden losses, and as a result of that lack of awareness, our tendency to have a heavy cost focus in our businesses, which doesn't always serve us well, as we've seen. The second root cause, again, comes from management, but it relates to poor working relationships between departments, and those relationships and how they can result in mismatched requirements up and down the value stream. In fact, if we back up far enough to perspectives, we can make a direct connection to the bottom line. So I want to shed some light on that for you today. If we consider a mindset shift that must occur before we can capture hidden losses and convert them to profit, there's really two areas here that I want to explore with you today. One is a shift from can we meet budget thinking to how good can we be thinking. The second shift is a shift from a cost reduction culture to a loss reduction culture, and we're going to expand on that today. A shift from we plan to be this good to how good can we be. Whenever we go through the budget exercise every year, we put together a set of numbers, and as you know, the budget exercise itself often takes months to complete before it's finalized. And once we finalize that set of numbers, starting at the first of the year, whenever our year starts, and for many companies that's January 1st, our people are given new targets to achieve, and we plan to be this good. And so everything we do, month to month, day to day, we do try to achieve that budget goal. And I want to say that it's important to say here, there's nothing wrong with that. But it's also important to be aware that the budget goals draw a line or put a frame around our thinking that prevents us collectively from moving to a how good can we be mindset. You can see in this diagram, if we focus on planning to be this good, we're concentrating on the difference between actual and budget. And we focus on that variance all year long. And if we fall short of budget, we're explaining that variance as a shortfall. And once in a while, we do better than budget, which is great, and then we can explain how we did that. But that's our focus. If we shift to a how good can we be mindset, all of a sudden, the ceiling that's created by the budget is lifted. And when that happens, we collectively as a management team can begin asking new questions, different questions. We can begin setting different goals. We can begin making different choices. And what happens is we make more money as a result. Now, the good news here is that we don't take our eye off the budget. In fact, when we lift that ceiling and we begin asking how good can we be, and we begin behaving to achieve even higher goals as a group of people, achieving budget becomes easier than it was before. So there's nothing to be afraid of here if we make that shift. We're not taking our eye off the budget. We're doing even more good things to make it easier to achieve. So if we have that, can we meet budget mindset? We are usually focused on lowest cost. People are forfeiting value to achieve those targets. Not every day, but it does happen, and we're not aware of it. We don't even know or understand that we have a financial loss occurring, and we accept certain organizational barriers in our companies as normal. Our people are disconnected from a huge opportunity to reduce losses and increase earnings. And companies operate from this mindset for decade at a time, not recognizing the kinds of losses that could be happening behind the scenes that they've never tracked. If we can make the shift to how good can we be, however. Now we're chasing value instead of cost. We're looking for the highest value for the lowest cost, which is a different goal. Our potential loss is now known, and we can even use it as a KPI to measure our success. Not only that, we set a standard for ourselves that no organizational barriers are acceptable. Our people understand the value at risk, and they play an active role in reducing losses. It's just part of what they do every day. I'd like to stop here for a moment and share an analogy with you about these barriers that I'm speaking of, these organizational barriers that we tend to accept as unchangeable. A few months ago, the Indianapolis 500 was run in the state of Indiana in the United States. Some of you who follow auto racing may have watched that on TV. I actually was in Lima that week on business and watched the 500 from my hotel room. I grew up in Indiana where that race is run, and I think I've only missed that race maybe twice, as long as I can remember. For those of you that are not familiar with that car race, this is what happens. 33 of the fastest cars in the world qualify for that race. All the cars can go at least 200 miles an hour. They're built for that kind of speed. On race day, they line up 3 in a row, 11 rows, 33 of them. They go around for one last time on the track before the green flag is dropped and the race starts. Every driver, every racing team's intent is to win that race. In their mind, the only barriers they have are two. One is if their car breaks down and they can't run the full 500 miles, and the other is if a driver gets in front of them that they can't pass and they're not able to win the race. Other than that, they start that race with the intent of winning it, and almost nothing in their mind is standing in their way. Can you imagine, after the millions of dollars that have been invested by racing teams for the cars, for the drivers, for the pit crews that are just trained at amazing levels of perfection? Can you imagine on race day, they're ready to drop the flag to start the race, and the announcer comes on and he says, "I'm sorry, but today we can only go 30 or 40 miles an hour because there are traffic cones and tree limbs on the track." Can you imagine what would happen? There's 250,000 people in the stands, all the people in the pit crews. I can about tell you what would happen. People would be climbing out of the stands, running out onto the track to clear those tree limbs and traffic cones so those cars could go 200 miles an hour as quickly as possible. Because in their mind, tree limbs and traffic cones are not going to hold these cars back from having a great race. Now, why do I tell you this story? Because what do we do in our companies? We spend millions of dollars on equipment. We spend a lot of money training our people. And yet we're willing to accept some barriers that have always been in our organization as unchangeable. And because we're willing to do that, we lose millions of dollars without knowing it. And so today, as I go through this presentation, I'm shedding light on some of these invisible barriers, the barriers that have cost companies, not only in mining, but in all industries all over the world, millions, perhaps billions of dollars without their knowledge. And it truly is sometimes a matter of our choice, what we're willing to accept and what we're willing to change, that prevents us from maximizing profit. So one of the choices we need to make here is moving from a cost reduction culture to a loss reduction culture. When we make that shift, now no barriers are allowed in our organization, which is pretty cool. However, that shift requires collaboration, a new kind of collaboration perhaps than we've ever had between our departments. Now I've got 4 really important departments here highlighted: procurement, operations, maintenance, and engineering. Needs to be a new kind of working relationship between those 4 departments. There also needs to be a new kind of working relationship across the entire value stream. If you will, a comminution culture needs to form where everybody co-owns the value stream. We'll be talking more about that in a minute. Thirdly, we need a good working relationship, a new level of relationship between the management and the workforce and within the management team itself. Sometimes the greatest barriers are within the management team itself because of what management believes and has been taught to believe in college classes, in management training courses, from prior management teams as people come in and out of companies, retire and are replaced. People come in and behave as the old management team did. And so we are continually using these same behaviors, same choices, same kinds of thinking that are resulting in losses, hidden losses, and we're not aware of it. The first barrier, and again, we've talked about the lid on a jar. This is another piece of the lid on the jar. An organizational barrier is the organization chart itself. Now, the organization chart frames how we think about our own departments. If we have been promoted into a management role, it also frames our belief about how we should behave with other departments as we do our work every day, or as we solve problems, or as we watch other people in management do those kinds of things. When we are first promoted into management, we are given a box on this organization chart. And with that box comes a job description. And we are told that if we do a great job with our box, maybe we will be given another box and another box. And pretty soon we have a division of boxes. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's part of how we excel in organizations, and we get to be promoted up so we can even have a greater impact than we did before. So none of these comments are meant to be critical of that process. But the reason I'm sharing this with you is that the organization chart and its structure and the way we behave around its structure creates a mindset for us that makes it difficult sometimes to solve problems, harder than it should be. Makes it difficult to provide other departments downstream from us with the right specifications to make the most money. I share this chart with every one of my clients, so I wanted to share it with you today. You'll notice in the top half of this chart, there's 5 individuals, and each one has a different color square and a different shaped square above their head. Each one is thinking about I manage my box when they come into meetings, when they're asked to solve problems. Perhaps they're working on a change initiative together. They're still carrying that I manage my box thinking into these meetings. And it causes them to make choices that actually lead to lower profits. Those profits might not be lower tomorrow or even the next month, but the next year, the year after that, cumulatively, they will be adding up to perhaps millions of dollars of hidden losses that again are not tracked. If that group of people can shift to that lower diagram where all 5 people have the same single vision and they're all thinking, we co-manage this value stream, absolutely amazing things happen in companies when that shift occurs. Their choices as they work together lead to more profit. All of a sudden, they're willing to relinquish personal power for the sake of team power. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Again, moving from cost to loss helps remove the lid on an organization. But this truly is a choice that the management team has to make. If even one member of that team fails to make it, the entire team will suffer. It will become obvious that there's still conflict within the team. So everybody has to make this choice for this trade. People will be trading old perspectives for new perspectives. Old ways to reduce cost for new ways to reduce cost. Old ways to solve problems for new ways to solve problems. Old ways to collaborate, perhaps on expansions, or a desire to manage the value stream more as one unit, for old ways to manage that kept departments separated. And again, trading personal power for team power. All of those trades make it possible to capture hidden losses and reduce them permanently in an organization. Before we leave this session today, I want to share the connection between hidden losses, the optimization process, and profit maximization itself. I'd like to share some truths with you about what I call full optimization. As you know, companies that decide they want to shoot for optimization invest millions in new equipment and systems because they believe that that is the path to optimization. That's a great investment, but there's a lack of awareness that the people, the culture also needs to shift to an optimization culture in order to absolutely maximize profit. And by the way, it is possible to optimize a company without making an investment in new equipment. It is possible to optimize with the equipment and the people we've got today if we make this culture shift. The kind of culture shift I'm speaking of is site-wide, company-wide, not just in production and maintenance. It's across the entire company. It involves every department. And by the way, it's very exciting work when it happens. This kind of full optimization approach always requires a shift in thinking, and now we know what that means. We've talked about that. It always involves loss reduction, and now we know what that means. And it always involves management in a different way. Management's got to do some new things, make some new choices, measure some things they've never measured before, and interact in a different way if they're serious about full optimization. Again, full optimization cannot be achieved with equipment and systems alone. Billions have been lost because of this lack of awareness, and the key to success really is a new awareness of these hidden losses, new management choices, and new interactions between people. The only way to truly maximize profit is to do three things. Recognize the role of people in profit, connect people to their hidden losses, and then manage the culture as a separate income stream. It is very possible that none of you have ever heard that before, which is why I want to stop for a second and just think about it. We manage our equipment with the intent of maximizing profit. We spend millions on new equipment with the intent of optimization because we believe we can make more money by doing it. There is little recognition across this entire world that it is possible to manage the culture and shift the culture so that it, in fact, can connect to the hidden losses that only culture can release. And at that point, the people have their own hidden losses that they can capitalize on, and we can look at that work as a separate income stream and manage it appropriately. People talk to me or ask questions when I'm at conferences or conventions or in a venue like this, sharing these concepts. And they say, Kay, this all sounds really good. But is it really possible to do this? Well, I want to share a case study with you. I lived and breathed some of this case study almost 20 years ago. It was 1998. Copper prices reached 100-year lows, as low as 61 cents a pound 1 month that year. At that time, I was working for Cypress Amex Minerals Company, a company that was US-based, and at that time actually on Cerro Verde and El Abra in South America. And in those years, I was able to actually come to Cerro Verde and El Abra and do part of this work there all those years ago. We didn't call it removing the lid back then, but that's exactly what we did. In 1996 and 97, we adopted a how good can we be mindset from the top of the company all the way down. We shifted from a cost reduction to a loss reduction culture. We involved all of our key departments in the value stream. And guess what? In the month the copper price was the lowest, we broke even in that month. All competitors, and remember we started this presentation talking about competitive advantage. All competitors were laying off people by the hundreds, shutting down equipment, closing operations. At least in the US, this was going on everywhere. What did we do? Absolutely nothing. We had already positioned ourselves for a 100-year low copper price and didn't know it before it came. Because we could break even at 61 cents, when copper price started going up, we just kept operating. We're making money at still very low copper prices. It was amazing. It was an amazing experience to watch and know that it was really possible to do this. And people were the key, not our equipment. In fact, when prices were so low, management said, no new equipment, just figure out how to do the best you can with what you've got. And so this effort at optimization and profit maximization was done with no new equipment. As we wind down now, it's important to think about management's question in relation to hidden losses. When we are serious about profit maximization, we must understand that the secret lies with management, ultimately, not with equipment and not with the workforce. And this is because the traditional management system and the way management has been trained to execute that system is not aligned and really designed to maximize profit. It just isn't. However, with a new awareness about hidden losses and understanding about how to calculate them, how to integrate that information into decision criteria for the kinds of things on the numbers side of the business that we've spoken about, and also how to integrate that awareness into our new working relationships and making different choices to work together, it is possible to widen our focus. We talked about the narrow focus that our management teams give us, or our management system gives us. It is possible to widen that focus and perspective, which changes our profit and changes our culture. A loss reduction management focus delivers these things: the highest possible profit, regardless of price. A culture that generates profit because it knows how to chase hidden losses. More predictable results than what we had before, because now we're taking the surprises away surgically that created those hidden losses. Fewer recurring problems for the same reason. Higher management credibility, because now all of a sudden we're more frequently meeting expectations. We're more frequently meeting our forecast. the promises that we've made perhaps to the board of directors, the shareholders, we're more able to meet those promises. And lastly, now we've got a secret weapon for leading the competition. So now management's question changes from how much money can we make to are we willing to change to make it? And all of a sudden, the answer to that question is the key to unlocking millions of dollars of hidden profit in our companies. In closing, I picked up this piece of copper ore in Peru almost 20 years ago. You can see it's really high grade, lots of copper in it. Our question today is, can we maximize profit in the process of turning it into this? And the answer is yes. We can do it if we shift to a loss reduction focus. Thank you very much. I appreciate your attention, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Nice presentation. Actually, very true. Just want to ask you a question. In your experience, how can you see how difficult has been that transition between cost reduction to loss reductions? I mean, how difficult has been to convince management that actually they could do better if they see what they are losing, but they cannot perceive? I mean,
Yes.
many companies, and that's for you guys, and many companies, they just see when they are losing. When the mine is in problems, they take actions. But when the mine is going well and they are getting good profits, they do not understand that actually they could get more.
Yeah.
They are happy. So how difficult have, in your experience, how difficult has been to convince management that you should see, even though you are getting well, you could get more? How difficult has that been?
Yes, you know, that is such a great question, and I agree with everything you just said, and I'll share my answer. The secret to this is exposing the dollars associated with hidden losses. Without the dollars, without the example that I shared of the $4.5 million lost, a true, real loss from profit that occurred because we were trying to save a few $100s on a hydroset hose. Until we have a handle on those kinds of losses, it is difficult to get management's attention. And what you say about these losses being there regardless of price is absolutely true. They're always there. And when prices are high, as you say, costs aren't that important. When prices are low, everything shifts to cost, and now we're perhaps making decisions that causes us even bigger losses, but because we don't measure that, we don't know. But if we can start with the dollars, which is where I start with the dollars, and help management see exactly what it is that they're losing, that they never see a report on. Some of those dollars, in fact, many of them are not even on the general ledger. The interesting things about these dollars is these dollars create urgency because they're attached often to management credibility issues. They're attached to promises that were made but weren't kept. They're attached to trust sometimes within the management team or between management and the workforce. There's often a linkage to some of these dollars. And so when we are able to reduce these dollars, really great things happen in the organization between trust and relationships simultaneously. But your short answer to your question, I always start with the dollars. And then once we uncover some of those dollars, all of a sudden management can't wait to get started. And they say, how fast can we do this? And what's interesting is when there's that kind of urgency, there's also an urgency to change and make different choices that I have not experienced around change in day-to-day operations. It's a different kind of urgency. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Ms. Silver. Very honest. Thank you so much. No, y no hay pregunta. Okay.